Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to India Game Changer. Today, we are joined by Swathi Kulkarni, a co-founder and CEO at Elda Health. I hope I got all that right. Swathi, thank you so much for coming to the show. How are you doing today?
Michael, thanks a lot for inviting me in. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I'm doing quite well. It's been a lovely weather here in Bangalore, despite the rains. I think it's a nice sunny morning after a long time. So yeah, it's going to be a great day today.
Good for you. I was talking to some of my friends today in Bangkok, which is where I live. It's raining there. And then I kind of peeked out the window here as well. And it's just like cloudy and raining too. Yucky. Anyway, before we get to the central part of our conversation, I would love to get some of your background for some context.
Sure. I'm an average Indian woman, if I may. And I say this with a lot of respect for all the average women that we have in India. But I grew up in a slightly non-traditional sort of household.
Tell me.
My father is a retired army gynecologist. And, we've been to different cities, towns in the country. So just the experience of meeting people from different, states, different religions was extremely, I would say, enriching. And it's an integral part of my upbringing. But I think the more interesting part was growing up with, dad, who's a gynecologist. So a lot of these conversations were typically, matter of fact and very, very unlike what you'd see in Indian households, especially for kids who grew up in their 80s and 90s.
Did you know that though, when you were a young girl, right? So you'd sit around the dinner table or even just like in the lounge or whatever you call it, right? You're sitting with your mom, your dad, your family, and they're having these conversations that to you seem kind of normal. But if you went over to somebody else's house, you're like, no one seems to be talking about this kind of, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it happens even now more often than not. Some of these conversations are so normal that I find it very difficult to be discreet about them, if I may. But yeah, I think it was a very, very different sort of a setting in our household. And like you said, conversations over the dinner table, in the living room would be very, focused on women, focused on how we should speak about certain things openly, break taboos and so on. And today when I go to, people's places, I feel like in a number of, at least circles in terms of my friends, my in-laws, where I was introduced into their families, I feel like we're replicating what I saw when I was growing up, especially in my household and hopefully in a number of others.
It begs the obvious question, right? First of all, what were these conversations like when you were growing up? But almost more importantly, what's the necessary discretion? In other words, if I was a 14-year-old friend of yours, a male friend of yours, right? And I just came home with you to study calculus or whatever we were doing, and I had broken my leg or hurt my knee, and we were sitting around, so I was having a medical problem, right? And I'm like, oh God, my knee is killing me. And I got this knee injury by this thing where I fell or I was playing rugby or playing cricket or whatever it was. Nobody would even think twice about it. Nobody would turn their head while you and I were having this conversation as 14-year-olds or 13-year-olds. Nobody would care. So what's the like, I've always had this thought myself, like, why is it that when we turn to, gynecology or men's health or things that are very like kind of sexual in nature, that we have to be so discreet? Like, I understand, I don't want to share the intricacies of my sex life necessarily, but my health is like a completely different thing, it feels to me, no?
No, absolutely. I think the taboos associated with women's health in general, especially whether it's puberty, whether it's, during pregnancy, either before when you're trying to conceive,
right,
or partum. For that matter, even menopause is big taboo in most households. And I'm assuming that's not just in India. Even when I my Western friends, these are topics that people wouldn't talk about. You talk about a fracture that you've had, or a pain in your neck or knee without batting an eyelid, because it's very normal. It's considered as absolutely normal, right? But if you're talking about periods, for example, or issues with PMS, issues that people have trying to conceive, sexual health issues, where couples aren't compatible, or there is a lot of psychological baggage to what you bring. Right. I would say not to the table, but to the bed, and especially menopause, as I'm building Elda in this space. But I think these are all topics that are very taboo. I mean, let me give you an example of this 14-year-old. My son coincidentally is 14-year-old, and I see him talking to his friends at school, whether they're girls or boys. I think this generation is definitely different from what I've been growing up. A few years ago when my son was just 9 or 10, I actually sat him down and spoke to him about periods and told him why it is important to sort of empathize with other women, right? And that time, my little daughter was only 5 years old, and my son was really worried if she was going through that too. But I think the sensitization across the board for us as families, at school, whether it's education, at workplaces, let people know that having your periods is as normal as maybe as normal or as important as your heartbeat. Like my dad always says, right? You're a woman from the womb to the tomb. So the moment your mother has you in your womb, and you have a tiny uterus as an embryo growing into a baby, the care starts from there, from what your mom eats, how your mother's treated as a woman.
Yeah.
That's how you continue to grow. And as women, I think from our mother's womb to the tomb till we breathe our last breath, I think it's very important for us to understand that everything that's going through the hormonal roller coasters that we are going through are very, very normal. And they should be dinner table conversations.
I think so. I want to back up a little bit and give you my perspective, right? Because I often try to sit back and think, why do I have a perception about something in the way that I do? And I go back to my grandfather and my grandmother. I could tell stories about like how much he needed her because my grandfather was brilliant, but left school when he was 7 years old because he stuttered in the 1910s, I think it was, right? So they thought he was retarded. That's what they told him. And he was like, he just ran away from school because he was getting beaten up. Turns out he built a very big business, but he couldn't write his own name. He couldn't sign his own name and he couldn't do any math. My grandmother was an actuary, so she was slightly better educated and could do a little bit of math kind of thing, right? But because he needed her so badly, he gave this to his own sons as well, right? This idea that like women are important and are meant to be treated in a very specific way, and that's with deep respect. Because without her, he would not have been able to be what he was. And that was passed down to us as well. And I also grew up in a house with 2 sisters and a mother. So for me, all of these conversations seem kind of normal because there was always somebody in the house menstruating and always somebody in the house. It was not like when I went to college, it just seemed like, sure, I get it. I lived in a co-ed dorm. Anyway, the point is that humans have been doing this. Women have been doing this forever. So it's not like it's something new that we have to get used to. It's something that's just there. And every man who has a wife or a mother or a sister or should know this and should just be as comfortable talking about this as they are talking about anything. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely, Michael. I mean, I'm so glad you said that. I think it starts from what you see in the family.
Yeah.
The fact that your grandfather, appreciated your grandmother, and there's sort of an equitable relationship between the two, right? It's not about, who brings what to the table because we're all born with different skills.
Yep.
I think just bringing that mutual love and respect, and I keep telling, my younger team, a lot of my colleagues too, that there's always love in the relationship. But I think what's typically missing sometimes is the respect that we show, whether it's
exactly
the women in our lives or to, our colleagues, male or women colleagues. So yeah, I'm so glad you said that, and really heartening to hear that you're extremely comfortable with this. And I'm hopeful that people like us can actually make that change in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought a lot about normalizing these conversations, right? Which is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you. But I want to talk to as many people that are doing what you're doing as possible. So it just feels like, talking about cricket. I mean, it's much more significant, but it should be just as casual or just as easy.
Yeah.
There was a very funny scene, I mean, in a very sort of sarcastic way in 1970s television. I don't know if you've ever heard of this show called All in the Family.
Yeah, I have.
So they did a whole show about Edith Bunker entering or going through menopause, and it showed like the male perspective. And Archie Bunker's, I think, if I remember correctly, one of the most famous things he said was he turned to her and he goes, I get it, you're changing. How long is this going to take? Do it now and then we're done with it, kind of thing. You're laughing, right? Because I think that's the way most people feel about it. Maybe we can dig a little bit deeper and talk about what menopause really is, when it like on average onsets, and just the things about it that you think are important that people should know.
Sure. No, I think there's a lot of stuff that's unknown about menopause. And I feel that it's only in the last few years that people have even started focusing that this is a huge phase of a woman's life.
Okay.
So, Michael, we spend as women 1/3 of our lives in menopause. That's how big this phase is.
But wait, what does that mean though? Does it mean that, so it's not like a transition, it's just like, it's a thing that then just continues until death? I'm asking.
Yeah, no. So anything in life, for example, is a phase. So you hit menopause when you have not had your periods for a year.
Okay.
Right? That's when you say this lady has hit menopause.
Okay.
But unlike just something that happens, at a point in time, this phase, as I would like to call it, is basically something that starts way before you get to that stage where you say, I'm menopausal, right? I've hit my menopause. I've not had periods for 12 months. So it starts, much earlier. So there is a premenopausal, phase that you go through. There's a perimenopausal phase. There's menopause and there is postmenopause.
Okay.
So I can simplify this and tell you, just like I now tell my kids about menopause. See, there is this very friendly hormone, as I would like to call it, my soul sister hormone, that is estrogen.
Estrogen, yeah.
That is there in our bodies, right? As long as I have estrogen, estrogen as a woman, I'm protected from a number of health concerns, which you as a man may not be protected. For example, hypertension, the possibility of becoming diabetic. You'll see fewer women having that until a certain age because I have my friendly hormone estrogen that's protecting me.
Go ahead.
What happens during your perimenopausal years is the estrogen starts dipping. So then not only do I have my own female problems, which I'm blessed with.
Now you got all my problems.
I also get all the other gender neutral problems, so I'm more prone to diabetes. I am more prone to hypertension. But the moment the estrogen starts dipping, I basically start seeing problems in 3 areas.
Go ahead.
First is physical problems, right? So those physical problems could manifest in terms of lethargy, tiredness. I don't know if you remember any of your, either your mom or your aunts or your female, family members who are in their 40s and 50s. You'll see a sudden dip in their energy levels. And that's also because we're hitting menopause. We're getting closer to that.
Got it.
So you'll see issues with your skin and hair. The lady sort of loses that luster in the skin and the hair and so on. So these are all physical problems that you as a partner or as a colleague can actually notice.
Got it.
But that's not just that, right? There are some gynec issues which are more intimate to the woman. So there's a big joke about hot flashes. Not many of us really know how tough it is. Imagine if you feel like you're set in front of the furnace for a few minutes and then that's it, right? So even if you're in an air-conditioned room, there's absolutely low temperatures around you. You feel like it's just so hot and there's a sudden flash of this heat. And the woman goes through it for a really long time. So hot flashes is a real problem that most women who are menopausal go through. And it's not easy for others to understand because they don't see it.
Yeah, you can't feel it, right? A man can't feel it, or someone who's not going through it can't feel it, right? So it's like, what does it mean? Yeah.
And then there are other issues that are even more intimate, which we call the urogenital issues. For example, the vaginal dryness. Till the estrogen levels are high, there is moisture in the private parts of the woman, right? Yep. So she's able to function normally, whether it's intercourse, whether it's general, urinary issues. The problems are at bay. But the moment the estrogen level goes down, the lady is actually prone to a number of issues through vaginal dryness, sexual health problems. There is urinary infections, that she's more prone to. So very often you'll see women in their 40s and 50s having urinary tract infections and so on. And this is because our friendly hormone is no more there with us.
Can I ask you this though? So we spent a lot of time, and I want you to see, so give me just a second for this, right? We spent a lot of time talking about financial literacy. We spent a lot of time talking about, financial inclusion as well in fintech or other types of conversations that we have. Mm-hmm. You know a lot about this, right? But I feel like, is it the case that so many women kind of wake up one day, and I'm obviously simplifying this, without knowing that this is the result of low or falling estrogen levels, and that they end up with these changes that they don't understand. So even if someone's with them, you can't even ask them because they don't understand it either. So they need to have their own sort of health literacy before they can even share it with somebody else. Does that make sense? In other words, you know this because you grew up around it, right? But like even friends of yours, girlfriends of yours, guy friends obviously know none of this stuff, right? But even female friends of yours that have known you your whole life or that are 10 years younger than you would have no idea like why this is happening. Is that fair? And then they're confused as well, no?
No, that's absolutely fair. That's more than fair, Michael. And let me also confide that I didn't know much about menopause until a few years ago, despite being the daughter of a gynecologist.
Yeah, can I just jump in here for a second? I've always wondered this, and I gotta say this out loud. Like for generations before yours, most gynecologists on average were guys.
Absolutely, yeah.
But they're not going through any of these problems themselves. They're just interacting with people that are having these health issues. So they don't experience it personally. At some level, it must be harder for them to understand because they don't have estrogen. I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
I would disagree with that.
I don't know, right? But go ahead.
I think male gynecologists are great too. I think there's empathy.
Oh, I think they're super. That's not the point. Yeah, but this idea of like
feeling it, yeah. No,
if I've never had tooth pain, even if I'm a dentist, like I've never had that feeling. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so too. And that's why I feel that, that we should have more women founders out there building companies for women. Because if you haven't had a period, if you haven't gone through menopause, if you haven't had these issues, you really don't know what it feels like, So I think I agree with you, Michael, on that one.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, but coming back to the point on, knowledge about menopause, yes. I think big white space, not just in the Indian, context.
Everywhere.
Spoken to a number of women founders, leaders across the globe globe. And I think it's a big white space that needs to be solved. You were right on the point when you said that people don't know about menopause. I mean, forget about what's going with, what am I going through, right? With pregnancy, these are the things that are going to happen. This is what I expect. With puberty, that you'll have your first period, you may have PMS and so on. But majority of the women who come to us at Elda, and we've got around 40,000 women as we speak today who are a part of our community, majority of them had no idea about what they were going through.
Yeah, that's my point, right?
They don't know what's happening, right? So they don't know that there's this hormone. They don't know what they're going through is something that everyone goes through. So a lot of them are suffering silently and they're suffering alone.
Yeah, so do you think that, and let's use your 40,000 community sample as an example of this, right? But do you think, like, you're right, they're going through this alone, and in a way, because they're not even 100% sure that it's happening to anybody else, that there's nobody to lean on to say, like, hey, do you have this thing? Like, who's going to ask this question? Are you suffering from vaginal dryness, right? It's like, again, that should be easy to ask, but very few people are going to ask this question, right?
They don't. So you speak about everything else. You complain about your work, you complain about your mother-in-law, but you hardly talk about your health. That's the fact of life. And I think if somebody is there to just shake people up and say, hey, you're not alone in this.
Yeah.
And secondly, you don't have to endure this.
Right.
We keep telling our women, this is a beautiful phase of life. See, look at the menopause aspects of life. You don't have to carry a sanitary pad ever. You can run wherever and whatever because you're not going to have your periods, right?
Yeah.
You can be happy. A lot of women actually talk about a great sexual life after they've hit their menopause because they don't have to worry about contraception and so on. But I think this positive aspect of how we want to have women go through menopause is what we want to build. That's the awareness we want to talk about.
Let's do this. So what exactly is Elda Health? Since we've kind of alluded to it, but we haven't really mentioned what it is and how long it's been around and stuff like that.
Yeah, so we're a full stack digital healthcare platform for women.
Wow.
And we started off with a focus on menopause because we feel like this is the most underserved segment across the globe. I can conveniently tell you this, right? And with our lifespan increasing, the quality of life increasing, right? At 40 and 50, I feel like I've just started my life.
Same here. Same here. I'm way older than you and I feel like I'm just at the beginning. Go ahead.
So I feel like, I feel the same way, Michael. I feel like we've just started our lives. I mean, we've struggled to build skills. We've struggled to learn from, our experiences. And right now, I feel menopausal women are actually telling themselves that, hey, we have a life ahead of us and we want to do everything very well. And we want to be the healthiest of ourselves, of our versions, right? And I think health is central to whatever we do. So Elda started with a focus on menopause a year and a half ago.
Okay.
It started as a community of 250 odd women, in a WhatsApp group. And as you can see, in the last 18 months, we've actually grown really strong. If you ask me what is the vision and mission of Elda Health, I would say we want to make every woman feel healthier and happier, at every phase that she is in. And today we're looking at menopausal women. And I can vouch for the fact that women come in clueless about what's happening. They're like, oh my God, this is happening to me. There's no one else who's going through this because nobody's talking about it.
Right.
Everything's taboo. And in a country like ours, where our reproductive health is a reflection of how good we are, there are some cultures where wisdom is connected to age. But I think in most cultures, including yours and mine, the younger we look is, the better it is.
Can I ask you this though? Because you mentioned this in passing, but I want to make sure I ask about this. You said that reproduction, like what is the societal view and the cultural impact of like being able to have children, not being able to have children? Do you know what I mean? And is there a secular change taking place in India because that's where you are, but also maybe globally with this idea of I don't want to have children, but still just to back up, if you can't have children, right, there's always this sense, at least again in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when I was growing up, of like it's that guy's fault, or if it's this woman's, you know what I mean? Like there's this feeling of I'm not worthy enough of something because I can't reproduce. What is it like culturally, at least in your surrounding area?
Yeah. No, great point, Michael. I feel like we just did a research on this, right, as far as reproduction is concerned. And we speak to a number of women who are way into their 40s, and we're telling them that you are going through menopause.
Right.
A woman who's 46-year-old, for example. And I remember you'd asked me this question on what is that age of menopause, right?
Yeah.
Globally, on an average, 51-year-old woman would probably be hitting her menopause.
Okay.
In India, on an average, a 46-year-old is hitting her menopause.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of cultural nuance to menopause too.
Yeah.
But coming back to this point on how we perceive reproductive health as something that's an integral part of what we are.
Right.
I'll give you my personal opinion, which is definitely not the opinion of the country or the globe.
Go ahead.
But I feel, as a mother of two beautiful young kids, and I had my first when I was just 25, I've had several gynec health issues myself. So I can tell you that having a child was a choice for both my husband and I. There was no societal pressure. At 25, nobody forces you to have a baby or get married,
Right.
Even in India, if I may.
Okay.
I think consciously choosing to have a child, I feel, prepares you for parenthood, in a much better way.
Well, because you're at least thinking about it, right? Like you've made this conscious decision. You're like, the outcome of this activity is going to be that thing. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think having children or being a part of the reproductive act and not just a sexual act is a choice that the couple or the partners need to make, amongst themselves.
I agree.
So I think if you ask me my personal opinion, I feel like, reproduction has nothing to do with how we feel. But I think from a societal point of view, even today in India, we see a lot of couples struggling with wanting to have a baby because there's been parental pressures or there's been societal pressure and so on. So I won't discount the fact that it still exists. And I'm still talking about the 1% of the metropolitan, crowd that we interact with.
Sure.
I'm sure it's much deeper and bigger in, other parts of the country. The other thing that I would definitely like to highlight is that not just in India, but even globally, there was a study that was put up, right? If there is a sexual health concern or if there's a reproductive health concern in a couple, it's a higher probability that the lady or the woman goes and asks for help.
Yeah.
Because the man societally is not supposed to have a problem, unless all the problems of the lady are ruled out, the male never gets himself tested, which I think
is so strange, right?
Yeah.
It's so strange. When my wife and I were trying to have children, I want to back up and tell you this story just so it's not just about India, right? When I got married in Japan, and again, I find this really interesting, right? As a guy who grew up in a family with a bunch of ladies, like to me, having these discussions was not a big deal. But in Japan, I think similar to India, there's not a lot of conversation around the dinner table about sex, sexual health, reproduction, and stuff like that. Yeah. But I got on the phone with my father-in-law on New Year's. New Year's, very important holiday in Japan. He said to me, this is the first year of marriage, okay? Mm-hmm. And we weren't young. I think I was 33. I mean, it's young now, but it wasn't young then, if you know what I mean. Like, we weren't 18 and 19.
Sure.
And he just said to me, like, before saying Happy New Year, which is what you would say, it's the first thing a Japanese person says to anybody else that they see on the first day of New Year's, right? Akemashite omedetou gozaimasu, Happy New Year, yeah? But he didn't even say that. He said to me, Kotoshi yoroshiku onegai shimasu, which means this year, just do the right thing kind of thing. And I'm like, oh my God, my father-in-law just said, like, do you know what I mean?
Very uncomfortable conversation.
Really interesting, but so straightforward. And I remember taking the phone and looking at my wife and saying, your dad just said this to me. Is that what that means? And she was like, yeah, I think so.
Wow.
So I'm just saying, like, even in the 30s, there was a little bit of pressure. So I get that. But go ahead. Sorry.
I think it's interesting. We had a similar conversation when, my husband and I were getting married. And my father insisted that my husband would have a conversation with him at that time.
With him? Oh, before you got married?
Before I got married, but that was just a father-in-law, sort of figuring out whether this is the right guy.
Yeah.
But then before my marriage, my dad kept telling us that we should meet a gynecologist and ensure that we plan our lives, properly and so on. So both my husband and I, unfortunately or fortunately, I should say, we went and spoke to my dad at that time.
Right.
And, one statement that just stays in my head, even today, as I'm married for 18 years now, is that my dad just told us that, planning a child it's the responsibility of both the man and the woman.
Yeah.
And you should try not to have accidents or whatever that is, but the responsibility, just being mentally prepared. Yeah. And whether you want to have a child or not is also your call. Nobody else should sort of have that. And I feel very few families, Michael, have this sort of a concept, right? Yeah. But I see that growing. And coming back to the point of the woman still bears the burden of the child, from the ability to conceive one,
yes,
to the burden of actually bringing up the child. I think even in Indian, cultural setup, I feel even a lot of friends, American friends of mine, I see the same sort of a setup, right?
Yeah.
So I feel I'm very optimistic about the fact that we are, if not sprinting, at least inching towards an equitable world where, all of us are looking at making conscious decisions about things like this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I used to say that if men had to get pregnant and give birth, there would have only been one generation of humans.
Oh man, I couldn't agree more with you. I think that's absolutely true.
But I want to get back to this idea of this testing, right? So as you go through this journey, right? Because your father sounds very progressive, right? And at some level, he has to be to do what he does and to do it well. But further to that, you're warned your whole life, don't have unprotected sex and make sure that you have the proper birth control in place and stuff like that, because you don't want accidents, particularly when you're 18 or 20, or you're, you know what I mean? You're not in a stable relationship, or whatever your idea is of the right family unit. I'm indifferent, frankly. But then when you try, it's harder like to get pregnant than most people say. It's not like making French toast where you just have an egg, you crack, you know what I mean? It's not that easy sometimes, right? Do you think some of that's down to pressure? And do you think that should be taught as well?
Yeah. So I think it's a complex problem. And, I feel that there are 3-4 aspects to it. The first thing is we should be taught all of this while we're growing up.
Yeah, I think so.
It should be a part of our education system. And it's not just about contraceptives and otherwise.
Yeah.
I think the concept of, women do have a biological clock ticking. I think that's true. And we can't sort of trivialize that. So pre-planning some of these things definitely help. We have a lot of women who come in, in their 40s who want to conceive, and they really want to conceive, right? They're prepared mentally for it, but physically they may have some challenges, and that's how the superpower has made us as women, right? So I think there is definitely a lot of education needed, and it'll be good to introduce that in our schools. I think the second aspect to this, Michael, is the fact that you were mentioning, right, which is it doesn't happen overnight. When you're trying to conceive.
Rarely.
And this is a combination of the stress that we have and how the body responds to it. I don't know if I mentioned to you, but I took to Vipassana a few years ago when I realized that I'm not able to, and Vipassana is a meditation technique, right? Where you observe your breath and for days together go without thinking about anything else, but just, observe. Yeah. So we have an 11-day course where we don't talk to anyone. We don't have eye contact. We just meditate for 14 to 15 hours a day. But I think my recommendation even to women, and our senior gynecologist who's a part of my co-founding team also says this, right? That whatever happens first happens in your head. So when you're trying to, sort of conceive, just being peaceful, being stress-free, understanding that you can't control everything, just enjoy the moment or this journey towards what you're building.
Right.
I think as a person who believes in meditation, I could vouch for that. My gynecologist who specialized in this, my co-founder, she believes in it. So I think there is truth to that conceiving is a combination of your body as well as your mind.
Do you think as we move, I want to get back to sort of the startup part of this, but I'm very interested in this too. Do you think as the world becomes more and more scientific, right? And science obviously is ridiculously important. Are we losing a little bit of, what's the right word? Like our own personal internal connectivity. I don't want to go so far as saying spirituality, right? But we're just relying completely on science and removing this feeling of I need to empty my thoughts out so that I can be relaxed enough to do any of the things that I want to do or accomplish any of the things that I want to accomplish, right? Because if your stress level is high, you can't hit the cricket ball even, right? Because you're not focused enough. And then bring it all the way back to your sexual health, you probably can't get pregnant, or it's harder to get pregnant as well. So both of those things seem very different, and yet both seem to be driven by, like your co-founder said, it starts in your head and then moves into the rest of your body. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like we say, you can't pour out of an empty cup. You know?
You can't get water from a stone, right?
Yeah, you need to feel fulfilled and comfortable wherever you are. But I'd also like to add that even science tells you that. So at Elda, for example, whatever we do is very scientific. We don't do anything that doesn't have a proven sort of a system. Cool. But if you look at it, even scientifically, it is told that you need to be peaceful to sort of prove whatever. So our women, when they come into our system, we start with a series of counseling for them, because your basket needs to be sort of empty for us to shower our blessings into it, right? You can't have a leaky bucket. It can't just fall through it. And if you've already filled it with preconceived ideas and notions, then how do you pour into somebody else's basket? So and Michael, it's interesting I was really sort of amazed to hear your own story about, irrespective of whichever part of the globe you are in. I think do we have full control over how we think? I think the answer is no. No. There's a lot of we're reacting to others. And thank you for sharing your experience, in Japan. I think I would say that it's similar across the board.
Yeah. My father-in-law doesn't speak any English, so he'll never listen to this. My wife doesn't listen to my podcast. So, but
I'm amazed. You should definitely show her the bit where you speak Japanese. I'm super impressed by how fluently you just said it.
Oh, that's nothing. That's nothing. What is the idea? So a man is not going to go out and build a company like Elda Health. I mean, maybe he will, maybe he won't. Actually, there's a guy in Bangkok who built something called Mother Care. It always surprised me, and he cares about this a lot. But I'm curious if we want to back up a little bit from Elda itself and talk more about just women in the startup world as well. Like, what is the startup ecosystem like in India for women? I don't have any visibility on this at all.
Yeah. So I think it's definitely an uphill task for most women, but we are seeing that change slowly and steadily.
Okay.
Globally, if you see, it's a single digit number percentage of women founders who get funded.
It's a low single digit number.
It's
closer to 0 than it is to 10.
Yeah. So I think, I feel like that's a bit demotivating overall for even the younger generation that's coming up. But I think the positive aspect of it is that in my last 20 years of working, I feel like we've come a long way, especially in the last few years. I see a lot of my women friends, who are either in very senior positions. They're changing the way corporates are looking at women in general. I also am a part of these women founder cohorts. And honestly, Michael, I am so impressed and inspired by all these young girls, women of my age and much older. I feel like there is a change that's happening, but it's going to take, like they say, it takes a village to, bring up a child. It's going to take the entire country, the world, to ensure that the women are more empowered to make an impact. Another thing I wanted to add is with my own personal experience, when we were trying to raise funds for Elda as well as the previous companies, that I've been an integral part of, 95% of the times I'm talking to male investors. So to explain what a woman goes through, it literally, I think that's also my upbringing has also helped me, because I'm actually shameless when it comes to talking about things.
But you should be. That, let's just say that. But are they embarrassed? Do you know what I mean? Like, you walk in, it's Elda Health, it just says health, it doesn't say gynecological health. When you walk in, they're like, oh no, am I gonna have to talk about periods to this woman, kind of thing? Do you know what I mean? Or do they like pass that?
I think we've had conversations where people have been very comfortable. I think it also makes a difference about how we normalize this. So when my co-founders and I walk into a conversation, not just with investors, but other senior people, I think we normalize it and say, hey, this is okay. And we've been very fortunate because, out of the two investors who backed Elda, one of them, of course, is a senior woman leader, one of the few women leaders in India. So we've been lucky. But the other partner that we have, he has been extremely supportive of what we do at Elda. His wife is going through this phase. So it was almost like meeting another friend and talking about something. It was not a pitch at all. So, I think sometimes it's very, very convenient and comfortable, but most times men don't understand this. And it takes us at least the first 15 minutes to normalize and say, hey, it's okay. Please ask us questions. Even if you say, what is a period? It's okay to not know about it, right? Let us help you understand this a little bit better. So it is, at least in the women's health space, I think it's a little bit difficult for women founders. But women founders in general, I think the cultural nuances, that a woman goes through, whether it's in the cultural context or overall context, are a little bit more complex than what men might go through.
Okay. Do you feel, what's the right way to say this? This is a global thing, right? It's not just unique to women in India. Is there a part of your business that reaches out to people that are trying to build the same type of business outside of India, whether it's in Japan, in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, to try to figure out what they've done if they're further along in the development of their business than you are?
Yeah, I am in touch with a number of founders who are building in a similar space. And I feel like, I think various parts of Europe and the US are a little ahead of us, because we've got more women in their 40s and 50s who are actually in the workplace than we have in India today. Okay. But I see that number increasing. But I think maybe a couple of years behind in that journey, I see a lot of women today in India also coming up and, asking for these. The challenges are similar. When I speak to founders who've built similar startups in the UK or the USA, I feel like even women in the Western world are trying to break these taboos. They're trying to come out and say, hey, this is real. Hot flashes are real. Urinary issues are real. So let's talk more about it.
So what's next? I mean, once you build out this business around this core concept around menopause, what do you do next?
Yeah, I think we've just barely scratched the surface, and to even get to menopause, overall, and touch 100 million women in India and 1 billion women globally, right? That's the number of people who are going through menopause as we speak. So I think it's a tall goal for us, and I think we'll get there in the next few years. But I think women's health overall is underserved, and as menopausal women start looking after their health, their young daughters who are just hitting their puberty will have more information about how to take care of their gynec health. So I would say Elda does want to touch every woman who's going through any phase of her life and make her life better.
That's the perfect way to end. Swathi Kulkarni, a co-founder and CEO at Elda Health. That was awesome. Thank you so much for doing this today.
Thanks, Michael, for having me here.